Let's get into the takeaways. And the first one is the tough teams for Syracuse are at home. And this is massive for the Orange. The three teams that I'm talking about are Duke, North Carolina, and Virginia. Let's start off with Duke, okay? You don't need me to tell you how good Duke is at basketball. You don't. You know it by now, right? And if you don't, you can look it up. They're pretty good. Last year, they were in the Elite Eight, and I think most fans of them would consider that basically a failure. They're one of the only schools that can get to the Elite Eight, and you would kind of classify it as a failure for them. Like, if Syracuse got to the Elite Eight, would you be saying it's a failure for the Orange next season? I think we'd be thrilled if they made the Elite Eight. Oh my goodness, it'd be like they actually won the national championship if Syracuse got to the Elite Eight next season. Now, I know in past years, the expectation was a national championship, but in terms of next season, you get the idea, right? Syracuse has played Duke 8 times on the road since 2014, which was the year that Syracuse got into the ACC, and they've won at Duke twice. So that's 2-6, which isn't actually that terrible. 2-6 at Duke. You can easily be 0-8, 1-7, but regardless, you get Duke at home this year, not on the road. I think we take that, right? It's a little bit easier. They won their first year, or in 2016 and 2019 is when Syracuse beat Duke in the ACC. Remember, Elijah Hughes had that full court shot in 2019. It was pretty crazy. It was at the end of the first half. Duke is the best player in the country coming in at Cooper Flagg. They also have the best commit class in the country overall. Obviously, they have Malik Brown now, and Malik Brown probably won't play a substantial role for them. That's how deep and talented this Duke team is. It's good to get them at home, because going on the road and beating the Blue Devils next season, probably not likely. Home, it definitely boosts their chances. Next up is North Carolina. Syracuse has never won in Chapel Hill. They've never won in Chapel Hill, and not only have they never won in Chapel Hill, they very rarely keep it close. In 7 games in Chapel Hill, Syracuse loses by an average of 13 points per game. Let that sink in for a second. When they play North Carolina on the road, in those 7 tries, they lose by an average of 13 points. So very rarely is it an even close contest. It's one thing to lose at North Carolina. I think most teams do lose at North Carolina. That shouldn't hurt you all that much. But if you get blown out, that does hurt you. You can't get blown out. That's one of the keys to making the tournament. Don't get blown out. And Syracuse, oftentimes when they go to North Carolina, they lose by a lot. They did go to overtime in 2022. Cole Swider had a great game. He had, 36 points? It was his best game in a Syracuse uniform. And they still lost. It's just like they can't win there. They get them at home. And to further illustrate the importance of having North Carolina at home next season, last year they lost by 36 on the road. They lost at North Carolina by 36 points. Not long after, Syracuse faced North Carolina, the same North Carolina team that had just beaten them by 36, with no injuries, really. All their players were playing. They didn't get a lucky break that, RJ Davis was out, which, by the way, he's back for North Carolina next season, a consensus All-American. Armando Bacot was playing. They're all playing. All the horses are in the lineup for North Carolina. And Syracuse beat them at home. Let that sink in. They lost by 36 at North Carolina, and about a month later, they beat that same team at home. And I think they beat them by 7. So that's a 43-point turnaround, home versus the road. It's pretty important that Syracuse has North Carolina at home and not on the road for next season. So once again, one of the takeaways is Syracuse having the tough teams in the ACC at home for next season. And the third team that I want to illustrate, and this team doesn't really have as many expectations as the other two, right? Duke is projected to be a top 10 team. North Carolina projected to be a top 10 team. Virginia, not so much. They're probably on the bubble for next season. They really don't have the greatest roster in the world. But when Syracuse goes to Virginia, it's usually not very good. They really struggle. And Virginia has been a powerhouse team over the years, even though they are very much boom or bust in the tournament. regular season standpoint, this team usually wins a lot of games. Oftentimes they will exceed expectations. You won't think North Carolina or you won't think Virginia will be that good going into the year, and then they end up being pretty good. Could be one of those situations. Last year they lost by 22 at Virginia. It wasn't really close. They haven't broken 70 points against Virginia since 2009. That's home and the road. They don't even really score against Virginia in that defense, the pack line defense that everyone obsesses about, and it works. Syracuse can't really score on Virginia. No one really can, to be honest with you. They are 2-6 lifetime at Virginia. They beat them in 2020, which was the last time that Syracuse beat a ranked team on the road. But overall, you have Virginia this year at home. Makes it much more manageable for the Orange next season. So, the overarching takeaway for Syracuse basketball's ACC schedule, or at least one of them, is that the Orange have the tough teams. Duke, North Carolina, and Virginia, typically the three powerhouses of the ACC, places where Syracuse does not typically do well in. They have them all at home for next season. They do not have to go on the road to face those teams. Now, coming up, yes, it's nice that they don't have to play those teams, but Syracuse is going to be on the airplane a lot.